Welcome back to the channel. Today we are diving deep into one of the most talked about Marvel movies of recent years. We are talking about Black Widow, released in 2021. This is the movie that fans had been waiting for over a decade, and today we are going to break down everything about it, from its overview and background to the full plot, the cast, the release date, the trailer, and everything in between. So sit back, relax, and let's get into it. Overview. Black Widow is a 2021 American superhero film based on Marvel Comics featuring the character of the same name. It was produced by Marvel Studios and distributed by Walt Disney Studios Motion Pictures, making it the 24th film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now that alone tells you how massive this movie is. This is not some side project or a small-scale production. This is a full-blown Marvel Studios blockbuster that carries the weight of over a decade of storytelling on its shoulders. The film was directed by Kate Shortland from a screenplay written by Eric Pearson, and it stars Scarlett Johansson as Natasha Romanoff, also known as Black Widow. Kate Shortland is an Australian filmmaker who is known for her intense, character-driven films before stepping into the Marvel Universe. Her hiring was a bold and interesting choice by Marvel, and it paid off in a very meaningful way because she brought a grounded, emotional, and deeply human quality to the story that a typical action director might have missed. The film is considered both a sequel to Captain America: Civil War and a prequel to Avengers: Infinity War, and it serves as the fourth installment of Phase 4 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. What that means for casual viewers is that this movie takes place in between two massive Marvel events. It fills in a gap in the story of Natasha Romanoff that the MCU had never fully explored before, and it does so in a way that feels both fresh and emotionally satisfying. The film was written as a prequel that expands on Romanoff's history and helps bring her story to a close following the character's death in Avengers: Endgame in 2019. That is a very unique challenge for any filmmaker. You are making a solo movie for a character that the audience already knows is going to die. So the goal was never to shock the audience with plot twists about her survival. The goal was to give her the honor, the depth, and the recognition she deserved all along. Director Kate Shortland put a strong emphasis on the fight sequences and said that this was the most violent MCU film produced up to that point. Filming took place from May to October 2019 across multiple locations including Norway, England, Budapest, Morocco, and Macon, Georgia in the United States. The international scope of the production reflects the global, spy thriller nature of the story. This is not a movie set in one city or one fantasy world. It is a globe-trotting espionage adventure that takes the audience through multiple countries and multiple layers of Natasha's dark and complicated past. Plot details. Now let's get into the story itself, and this is where things get really interesting. The plot of Black Widow is layered, emotionally complex, and packed with action from beginning to end. The story begins in 1995, where super soldier Alexei Shostakov and experienced spy Melina Vostokov are working as Russian undercover agents, posing as a family in Ohio with young Natasha Romanoff and Yelena Belova as their daughters. Their mission is to steal SHIELD intelligence. After completing their mission, they escape to Cuba, where their boss, General Dreykov, has Romanoff and Belova taken to the Red Room for training. This opening sequence is one of the most powerful and heartbreaking in the entire movie. You see two young girls being ripped from what felt like a normal family life and thrown into a brutal system designed to strip them of their identity and turn them into weapons. It sets the emotional tone for everything that follows. Years pass, during which Shostakov is imprisoned in Russia while Romanoff eventually defects to SHIELD. By the time the main story picks up, Natasha has become one of the most skilled operatives in the world, first working for the Russians and then eventually becoming a core member of the Avengers. The present-day action of the film is set after the events of Captain America: Civil War. Natasha is now a fugitive, on the run from Secretary Thaddeus Ross and the United States government after choosing to help Steve Rogers and his team escape. While in hiding in a remote location, she receives a mysterious package from her past. That package sets off a chain of events that pulls her back into the world she thought she had left behind. She soon reconnects with Yelena Belova, the younger sister she grew up with during those years in Ohio. Yelena has managed to break free from the chemical mind control that the Red Room used to keep its Black Widow operatives under complete submission, and she has been working to expose the program and free the other widows who are still under Dreykov's control. Together, the two of them must confront the truth about who they are, where they came from, and what was done to them. To track down General Dreykov and put an end to the Red Room once and for all, Natasha and Yelena break their father figure Alexei Shostakov out of a Russian prison. He is a larger-than-life character who presents himself as a great hero, but has a lot of growing up to do emotionally. From there, the group travels to find Melina Vostokov, the woman who played the role of their mother, who is now living on a farm outside St. Petersburg and still working as a scientist refining the very mind control chemicals that were used on the widows. The climax of the film takes place aboard the Red Room, a massive floating fortress hidden in the sky. In a spectacular and intense final battle, Natasha and her surrogate family fight their way through Dreykov's forces, free the mind-controlled Black Widow operatives, and ultimately bring down the entire Red Room operation. Dreykov meets his end, Taskmaster is freed from the mind control that turned her into a weapon, and the widows are finally liberated. The film ends with Natasha now fully committed to reuniting the Avengers, setting the stage for the events of Avengers: Infinity War. A post-credits scene then jumps forward in time to after the events of Avengers: Endgame, where Yelena is given a new mission that directly sets up her role in the Disney Plus series Hawkeye. Cast. The cast of Black Widow is one of its greatest strengths, and every single actor brings something special and memorable to the film. Scarlett Johansson plays Natasha Romanoff, the Black Widow herself. Johansson had been playing this character since Iron Man 2 in 2010, which means by the time this film came out, she had spent over a decade building and inhabiting this role across multiple MCU films. In this movie, she gets to take Natasha to places the character had never gone before, exploring her vulnerability, her regret, her anger, and her deep capacity for love and sacrifice. It is the most complete and fully realized version of the character ever put on screen. Florence Pugh plays Yelena Belova, and she is an absolute revelation in this role. Yelena is funny, fierce, emotionally raw, and completely unpredictable. Pugh brings an enormous amount of charisma and authenticity to the character, and her chemistry with Johansson as surrogate sisters is one of the best things about the entire film. Many viewers came out of Black Widow convinced that Yelena had stolen the whole movie, and it is hard to argue with that. David Harbour plays Alexei Shostakov, also known as the Red Guardian, who is essentially Russia's answer to Captain America. He is a super soldier who was once a great operative but is now an aging, overweight man stuck in prison, still clinging to the glory days and constantly exaggerating his own importance. Harbour plays the role with enormous comedic energy and surprising emotional depth, and the character becomes one of the most entertaining parts of the film. Rachel Weisz plays Melina Vostokov, the brilliant but morally compromised scientist who served as a mother figure to Natasha and Yelena during their time in Ohio. Weisz brings elegance, intelligence, and quiet pain to the role, and her scenes with Johansson carry some of the film's most emotionally resonant moments. Ray Winstone plays General Dreykov, the main villain of the film and the man responsible for building and running the Red Room. He is cold, calculating, and genuinely threatening, representing not just physical danger but an entire system of exploitation and control built against women. Olga Kurylenko plays Antonia Dreykov, also known as Taskmaster. Taskmaster is one of the most visually impressive characters in the film, a masked assassin with the ability to perfectly mimic the fighting style of any opponent. The film takes Taskmaster in a very different direction from the comic books, turning the character into a tragic figure rather than a straightforward villain. O.T. Fagbenow plays Rick Mason, a resourceful ally who helps Natasha throughout her mission, and William Hurt reprises his role as Secretary Thaddeus Ross, adding continuity to the broader MCU timeline. Release date and trailer info. Black Widow had a complicated journey to its release. The film was originally scheduled to come out much earlier, but due to the global pandemic and the complete shutdown of cinema, it faced multiple delays. It was originally supposed to release on May 7, 2021, but was eventually pushed back and finally released on July 9, 2021. It was released simultaneously in theaters worldwide and on Disney Plus with Premier Access, meaning subscribers had to pay an additional fee to watch it at home on the same day it hit cinemas. The very first teaser trailer for Black Widow was released back in December 2019, and it immediately made an enormous impact on the internet. The trailer immediately stood out for its tone, which was darker, grittier, and more grounded than most Marvel trailers. It felt like a spy thriller in the tradition of great espionage cinema, with intense action, emotional dialogue between the characters, and a real sense of danger and consequence. Many critics and commentators noted the strong influence of films like Atomic Blonde and Red Sparrow in the tone of the footage, while also pointing out that Black Widow had a massive advantage over those films because it featured a character audiences had already fallen in love with over the previous decade. A full official trailer followed in the months leading up to release, and it expanded on the spy thriller tone while also showcasing the family dynamics between Natasha, Yelena, Alexei, and Melina. The trailers were widely praised for showing a side of the MCU that felt different from the usual superhero spectacle. The film was officially announced at the San Diego Comic-Con in 2019, where director Kate Shortland appeared alongside Scarlett Johansson and other members of the cast to present footage from the first 30 days of production. Critical reception and box office. When the film finally released, it received a broadly positive reception from both critics and audiences. On Rotten Tomatoes, it holds an approval rating of 79%, with the critical consensus describing it as a solidly entertaining standalone adventure rounded out by a stellar supporting cast. On Metacritic, it earned a score of 68 out of 100, indicating generally favorable reviews. Critics widely praised the performances of Scarlett Johansson and Florence Pugh in particular, as well as the quality of the hand-to-hand combat sequences and the emotional depth of the family dynamic at the heart of the story. Audiences gave the film an average grade of a- on CinemaScore, and 88% of surveyed audience members gave it a positive score. The common criticism was that the film arrived too late in Natasha's story, after her death in Endgame, and that the villain and the third act did not quite match the quality of the emotional first two acts. However, the overwhelming response was that the film was entertaining, well-crafted, and a worthy tribute to one of the MCU's most beloved characters. The film was also notable for being one of 28 films to receive the Reframe stamp for 2021. An award given by the Gender Equity Coalition reframed to films that demonstrate gender-balanced hiring practices both in front of and behind the camera. Legacy and what comes next. Black Widow is not just a standalone movie. It planted seeds for the future of the MCU in a very meaningful way. The introduction of Yelena Belova as a fully realized character immediately opened up a new chapter for the Black Widow legacy, and Florence Pugh went on to reprise the role in the Disney Plus series Hawkeye, continuing the storyline set up by the post-credits scene of this film. Yelena Belova is now one of the most popular characters in the entire Marvel Universe, and much of that is owed to what this film established. A behind-the-scenes documentary special called The Making of Black Widow was also released on Disney Plus as part of the Marvel Studios Assembled series, giving fans a detailed look at how the film was brought to life. The Falls Family in Ohio. The year is 1995. In a quiet, peaceful suburb of Ohio, There is a house that looks like any other on the street. There is a mother, a father, and 2 young daughters. They ride bikes, they eat dinner together, they laugh, and they seem like the perfect American family. But nothing about this picture is real. The man of the house is Alexei Shostakov, a Russian super soldier of extraordinary physical capability, a man engineered and trained to be the Soviet Union's answer to Captain America. The woman is Melina Vostokov, one of the most highly trained spies and scientists ever to graduate from the Red Room program. The 2 young girls are Natasha Romanoff and Yelena Belova, both of whom were taken from their biological families at a very young age and placed into this fake household as part of a deep cover mission. None of them are who they appear to be, and none of them are actually family, at least not in the way the neighbors believe. Their mission in Ohio is to steal classified intelligence from a SHIELD facility. Alexei and Melina have been operating undercover for years, patiently building their cover identities, gathering information, and waiting for the right moment to act. When that moment finally arrives, everything moves very fast. Alexei and Melina complete the mission, and then with barely any warning, the family is forced to flee. They pile into a small plane and barely escape as American agents close in around them. The 2 young girls, Natasha and Yelena, are terrified and confused. For them, Ohio was home. For them, this family was real, even if it was built on lies. They land in Cuba, where General Dreykov, the powerful and deeply sinister head of the Red Room program, is waiting for them. Dreykov oversees one of the most secretive and brutal programs in the world, a program that takes young girls, strips them of their autonomy, puts them through years of grueling physical and psychological conditioning, and turns them into highly skilled assassins known as Black Widows. He takes Natasha and Yelena from the only family they have ever known and sends them to the Red Room for training. Yelena, younger and perhaps more conditioned to obedience, accepts this without much visible distress. But Natasha is devastated. She does not want to go. She wants to stay in Ohio. She wants to keep the family that she knows deep down is fake, but that felt real enough to matter to her. This opening sequence of the film is set to a haunting, slowed-down cover of the song Smells Like Teen Spirit, and it works brilliantly as a tonal device. It takes something associated with youth, freedom, and rebellion and turns it into something melancholy and suffocating, which perfectly mirrors what is happening to these 2 little girls. Their freedom is being taken. Their childhood is being stolen. And there is nothing they can do about it. Years later, a fugitive on the run. The present-day story of the film picks up years after that childhood prologue. We are now in the period immediately following the events of Captain America: Civil War. The Avengers have fractured. Tony Stark's faction and Steve Rogers' faction have gone to war with each other over the Sokovia Accords, and Natasha Romanoff, who initially sided with Tony, ultimately chose to help Steve and his allies escape from the airport battle in Germany. That act of betrayal put her directly in the crosshairs of the United States government and Secretary Thaddeus Ross, who is determined to bring the rogue Avengers to justice. Natasha is now completely alone and completely off the grid. She is living in a converted camper van somewhere in rural Norway, moving around constantly, staying invisible, and doing everything she can to avoid detection. She has cut ties with everyone she knows and trusts, and she is surviving entirely on her own instincts and training. She is, in the most literal sense possible, a woman without a home, without a country, and without a family. Her isolation is interrupted when she receives a mysterious package. The package was sent by her old contact Mason, a resourceful man who operates in the gray areas of the intelligence world, and who has a habit of being able to get things that most people cannot. Inside the package is a case that Natasha does not immediately understand. But very quickly, things begin to make sense in the worst possible way. Someone out there wants her attention. And that someone is connected to her past in ways she thought she had buried a long time ago. Yelena's escape and the Red Room's secret. Before we see what happens next with Natasha, the film takes us to a different location to show us what has been happening with Yelena Belova. Yelena has spent the years since their childhood in Ohio as a fully operational Black Widow agent for Dreykov. She has carried out missions all over the world, believing completely in what she was doing, not because she chose to believe in it, but because the Red Room's chemical mind control ensured she had no choice. The Black Widows are not simply trained to obey. They are chemically subdued, their free will suppressed by a substance that keeps them in a state of total compliance to Dreykov's commands. But during a mission in Morocco, something extraordinary happens. Yelena and a small group of Black Widows are transporting something, and in the chaos of the scene, Yelena is exposed to a red mist, an antidote to the chemical mind control. For the first time in years, maybe ever, Yelena feels the fog lift from her mind. She feels herself again. She feels her own thoughts, her own instincts, her own rage. And then she looks around at the other Black Widows and understands, with horrifying clarity, exactly what has been done to all of them. Yelena fights her way out of the situation. She secures several vials of the antidote, understanding immediately that this substance could be the key to freeing every other widow still trapped under Dreykov's control. She sends one of those vials to the one person she still thinks about from her past. She sends it to Natasha. That is the package that Natasha receives in Norway. And that is why everything that follows happens. Reunion in Budapest. The two women eventually meet in Budapest, a city that both of them know well from their past. Budapest carries weight in the MCU. It has been referenced between Natasha and Clint Barton before as a place where something significant happened, and this film finally lets us see that city through Natasha's eyes. It is not a pretty reunion. Natasha and Yelena have not seen each other in many years, and their relationship is complicated by the fact that Natasha left. From Yelena's perspective, she was abandoned. Natasha went off and became an Avenger while Yelena stayed in the Red Room and continued to be. Their first scenes together crackle with a tension that gradually gives way to something warmer and more vulnerable. Yelena is funny, sharp, and deeply angry, and Florence Pugh plays every moment with incredible precision. She makes Yelena feel completely real. She mocks Natasha's dramatic poses. She points out that Natasha's signature fighting style is unnecessarily theatrical. She talks about wanting her own apartment, and wanting to have a cat, and wanting to just live a normal life for once. Underneath all the sarcasm and the bravado, there is a young woman who was robbed of a childhood, and who is now trying to figure out who she is when nobody is telling her what to do. But there is no time for a slow and gentle reconciliation, because the Red Room finds them almost immediately. A team of mind-controlled Black Widows descends on Budapest, along with the Taskmaster, a terrifying masked figure whose singular ability is to watch someone fight and then replicate their technique perfectly. Taskmaster is almost impossible to fight because every move you make teaches them how to defeat you. The battle through the streets and rooftops of Budapest is spectacular, and it ends with both women narrowly escaping. During a quiet moment after the chaos, Yelena tells Natasha something that changes everything. General Dreykov is still alive. For years, Natasha believed she had killed him during a mission years earlier, a mission that also resulted in the death of his young daughter, a girl named Antonia. That mission was one of the darkest entries in Natasha's ledger, something she carried with her as evidence of the worst things she had done as a spy. But Dreykov survived. The Red Room is still operational. And there are still dozens of Black Widows all over the world being used as weapons with no freedom, no choice. Natasha decides immediately that this has to end. Not because anyone is asking her to fix it. Not because it is her mission. But because it is the right thing to do, and because she knows better than anyone what these women are going through. Breaking Alexei out of prison. To find Dreykov, they need information. And the one person who might know where Dreykov operates from is Alexei Shostakov, the man who played their father all those years ago in Ohio and who has been rotting in a Russian prison ever since Dreykov had him locked away after the Ohio mission was complete. Natasha and Yelena travel to the remote Russian prison where Alexei is being held. The prison is freezing, brutal, and filled with dangerous criminals who have made Alexei something of a legend in their eyes. Alexei is not the sleek super soldier he once was. Years of imprisonment and a lack of purpose have left him physically changed and emotionally adrift. He still wears his old Red Guardian suit, though it no longer fits him particularly well. He still tells stories of his great battles and his glorious history as a Soviet hero, but it becomes increasingly clear that he is exaggerating and embellishing, filling in the gaps of a life that never quite lived up to the legend he tells himself. The prison break sequence is one of the most entertaining parts of the film. Natasha and Yelena work together with brutal efficiency, while Alexei, once he realizes what is happening, throws himself into the chaos with enormous enthusiasm and considerably more physical capability than his appearance suggests. They escape together, and what follows is a road trip sequence in which the three of them, Natasha, Yelena, and Alexei, are stuck together in close quarters. It is uncomfortable and funny and surprisingly touching. Alexei tries to reconnect with the girls as their father figure, and both women are having absolutely none of it. They know the family was a mission. They know the love was at least partially manufactured. But the anger they direct at him is not the anger of people who feel nothing. It is the anger of people who feel too much. Alexei tells them what he knows. He directs them to Melina Vostokov, who is living on a farm outside St. Petersburg and who may know how to find Dreykov. Reunion with Melina. Melina is not what either of them expected. She lives alone, running experiments on pigs, still working as a scientist, still, it turns out, connected to Dreykov's program in ways that are deeply unsettling. Melina was one of the original Black Widows, trained long before Natasha and Yelena, and she has spent years refining and advancing the very chemical mind-control technology that has been used to enslave every widow that came after her. She helped build the system that destroyed so many lives, including the lives of the two young girls she lived with and grew to care for in Ohio. The scenes at Melina's farm are among the most emotionally powerful in the entire film. Natasha and Melina have a conversation that cuts to the bone. Natasha confronts Melina about the choices she made. Melina tries to defend them, to explain them, and to some degree, to apologize for them without quite finding the words. Melina also tells Natasha something about her own origins that she did not know. Natasha was not simply recruited to the Red Room because she was talented. She was selected at birth by a program that assessed genetic potential in infants. Her parents were paid off and later killed when Natasha's mother threatened to expose the program after realizing what had been done to her child. The woman Natasha has always thought of as a cold operative was, in fact, a mother who loved her daughter enough to risk her life for her, and paid the ultimate price for it. This revelation reframes everything Natasha thought she understood about her own past and her own identity. She spent her life believing she was a weapon created by a program. She is beginning to understand that she is also a daughter who was loved. Melina ultimately agrees to help. She uses her access to Dreykov's system to help them get to the Red Room, and in doing so, she makes a choice that puts her own life at enormous risk. It is the closest thing to redemption the film offers her, and it is handled with subtlety and grace. The battle at the Red Room. The climax of Black Widow takes place aboard the Red Room itself, which turns out to be a massive, highly sophisticated fortress that floats in the sky, hidden from radar and invisible to conventional detection. It is an extraordinary facility, cold and sterile and deeply sinister, a place designed entirely around the manufacture and control of human weapons. Natasha infiltrates the Red Room using a plan that involves switching places with Melina in a brilliantly staged sequence. The deception works long enough to get her inside, but things quickly spiral into full-scale chaos when the others arrive as well. Alexei, despite being outnumbered and outgunned, throws himself into battle with the enthusiasm of a man who has been waiting years to do exactly this. Yelena, sharp and relentless, moves through the facility with one goal in mind: getting to the tanks where the antidote is stored so she can release it into the ventilation system and free every mind-controlled widow in the building at once. The Taskmaster is a constant and terrifying presence throughout the battle. This masked assassin, who has been hunting Natasha since Budapest, is seemingly unstoppable. Every time Natasha fights back, Taskmaster adapts. Every technique she uses, every move she makes, is absorbed and countered. The battle between them is brutal, and Natasha eventually confronts General Dreykov directly, and this confrontation is one of the most satisfying moments in the film. Dreykov is not a physical fighter. He is a man of power and control, and he feels completely untouchable inside his fortress, surrounded by his widows who are programmed to protect him. He taunts Natasha, reminding her that she can never hurt him because the widows are chemically conditioned not to harm him in any way. The pheromone connection between Dreykov and his widows is so deeply embedded in their conditioning that they physically cannot strike him, no matter what their own instincts or desires might tell them. Natasha finds a way around this that is shocking and painful and absolutely in character for who she is. She deliberately breaks her own nose to destroy her sense of smell, severing the pheromone connection and allowing herself to fight back. It is a brutal and unflinching moment that tells you everything about who Natasha Romanoff is. She will do whatever it takes. She will hurt herself if that is what the situation demands. She has never been the kind of hero who wins without cost, and she does not start being that kind of hero now. With Dreykov incapacitated and the antidote released through the ventilation system, the mind-controlled widows begin to recover their free will. They stop fighting for Dreykov. The Red Room begins to collapse. Yelena reaches Taskmaster and administers the antidote directly, and as the mask comes off, the identity beneath it is revealed. Taskmaster is Antonia Dreykov, the daughter whose death Natasha has been carrying on her conscience for years. Antonia did not die in that explosion years ago. Dreykov saved her, but in saving her, he turned her into his most powerful weapon, implanting technology in her body that gave her the ability to mimic any fighter she observed. He turned his own daughter into a weapon and a slave, just as he did with every other person in his program. Freeing Antonia is not just a tactical victory. It is the moment Natasha finally, truly lets go of one of the darkest entries in her ledger. The girl she thought she killed is alive, and she is free. Dreykov meets his end as the Red Room falls from the sky in a spectacular and fiery sequence. The entire fortress plummets toward the earth, and the various members of this strange surrogate family work together in the chaos to survive. The destruction of the Red Room is complete. The aftermath. When the dust settles and the fire dies down, Natasha Romanoff has accomplished something that perhaps no one else in the world could have done. She has dismantled the Red Room. She has freed the Black Widows. She has confronted her past, reconciled with what remains of her surrogate family, and closed the chapter that has defined her entire life. Yelena and the freed widows begin to scatter across the world, finally given the freedom to choose their own paths for the first time. Yelena has become something new, not a weapon, not an operative, but a person, someone with her own thoughts and her own choices and her own future. The bond between her and Natasha, forged in childhood and tested by years of separation and resentment, has become something real and lasting. Alexei and Melina, flawed and complicated as they are, have played their part. Whether they have earned forgiveness is left somewhat open, as it should be. Forgiveness is not a simple transaction, and the film is honest enough not to pretend it is. Natasha is captured briefly by Secretary Ross's forces but is freed by Mason, who arrives with a Quinjet and allows her to escape. In the final moments of the film, Natasha dyes her hair blonde, symbolically becoming something new, and sets out to find Steve Rogers and the rest of the Rogue Avengers. She is still a fugitive. She is still on the run. but she is no longer running from her past. The post-credits scene then jumps forward to after the events of Avengers: Endgame. Natasha Romanoff is gone, having sacrificed her life on Vormir to obtain the Soul Stone. Yelena is shown visiting her grave, mourning her sister in a quiet and heartbreaking moment. A woman then approaches her, a woman working for Valentina Allegra de Fontaine, one of the MCU's emerging shadowy power players. Valentina gives Yelena her next target, a man she describes as responsible for Natasha's death. That man is Clint Barton, also known as Hawkeye. This scene sets up Yelena's storyline in the Disney Plus series Hawkeye, where she goes on to pursue Clint before Scarlett Johansson. Scarlett Ingrid Johansson was born on November 22, 1984, in New York City. She came into the world as one of 4 children born to Karsten Johansson, a Danish architect, and Melanie Sloan, who worked as a film producer. Her father was born in Copenhagen, Denmark, which is where Scarlett gets her Scandinavian heritage from, and her mother came from a family with Ashkenazi Jewish roots. Growing up in a household that was both culturally rich and financially modest, Scarlett developed a passion for performance at an extremely young age. She was not pushed into it by her parents. It came entirely from within her. By the time she was just a small child, she was already telling her family that she wanted to be an actress, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. She grew up on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, which is one of the most culturally vibrant neighborhoods in all of New York City. Being surrounded by theater, film, art, and music from a very young age shaped the way she thought about storytelling and performance. She began attending acting classes as a child, and her mother, recognizing her genuine passion and talent, supported her fully in pursuing auditions. It was not long before she began booking work. Her first significant film role came in 1994 when she appeared in the film North, a big-budget comedy that received a famously poor critical reception but gave Johansson her first real taste of working on a major Hollywood production. She was only 9 years old at the time, and already she was holding her own alongside established adult actors. Her natural presence on camera was immediately visible. There was something about the way she occupied a scene that felt instinctive and unforced, qualities that cannot be taught, and that most actors spend entire careers. Her breakthrough came in 1996 with the film Manny and Lo, in which she played a quiet, emotionally complex young girl in a story about 2 runaway sisters. The film received critical praise, and Johansson's performance in particular was singled out as extraordinary for someone her age. Then came the role that truly announced her to the world. In 1998, she starred in The Horse Whisperer, directed by Robert Redford, playing a young girl recovering from a traumatic accident. The film was a major commercial and critical success, and Johansson's performance was deeply affecting, earning her widespread recognition as one of the most talented young actresses of her generation. What followed was a fascinating and somewhat unusual trajectory for a young actress. Rather than gravitating toward typical teen comedies or light studio fare, Johansson consistently chose challenging, unconventional material. She appeared in Ghost World in 2001, based on the beloved graphic novel, playing a character with an outsider perspective and a dark, sardonic worldview. The performance was subtle, layered, and deeply committed, and it showed that she was not interested in playing it safe. The year 2003 changed everything. She appeared in 2 films back-to-back that elevated her from promising young talent to bona fide movie star. The first was Girl with a Pearl Earring, in which she played the mysterious muse of the Dutch painter Johannes Vermeer. She said almost nothing throughout the film and communicated volumes through expression and stillness. It was a performance of remarkable restraint and beauty. The second film was Lost in Translation, directed by Sofia Coppola, in which she starred opposite Bill Murray as a young woman adrift in Tokyo, feeling disconnected from her marriage and from herself. Lost in Translation was an immediate sensation. It won the Academy. From that point forward, Scarlett Johansson became one of the most in-demand actresses in Hollywood. She worked with Woody Allen multiple times, appearing in Match Point, Scoop, and Vicky Cristina Barcelona. She starred in The Prestige alongside Christian Bale and Hugh Jackman. She appeared in The Other Bullen Girl opposite Natalie Portman and Eric Bana. She demonstrated a remarkable versatility, moving between period dramas, psychological thrillers, comedies, and science fiction with apparent ease. Then in 2010 came the role that would define a decade of her career. She joined the Marvel Cinematic Universe as Natasha Romanoff, the Black Widow, in Iron Man 2. What began as a supporting role in someone else's superhero story grew over the years into one of the most beloved characters in the entire MCU. She reprised the role in The Avengers, Captain America, The Winter Soldier, Avengers, Age of Ultron, Captain America, Civil War, Avengers, Infinity War, Avengers, Endgame, and finally in her own standalone film, Black Widow, in 2021. Over the course of a decade, she brought extraordinary depth, physicality, intelligence, and emotional complexity to a character who was frequently underwritten in earlier films. Beyond her MCU work, she continued to take on ambitious and unconventional roles. She voiced the operating system Samantha in Spike Jonze's Her, delivering an entire performance with nothing but her voice and earning tremendous critical praise for it. She starred in Under the Skin, a deeply strange and hypnotic science fiction film in which she played an alien entity preying on men in Scotland, a performance so committed and unsettling that it became one of the most discussed films of its year. She starred in Lucy, in which she played a woman who gains extraordinary cognitive abilities, a film that became a massive international box office hit. In her personal life, Scarlett Johansson has lived very much in the public eye. She was married to actor Ryan Reynolds from 2008 to 2011, a relationship that attracted enormous media attention given that both of them were major stars. After their divorce, she had a relationship with French journalist Romain Doriac, and the two had a daughter together named Rose, born in 2014. They later separated. She then began a relationship with comedian and television personality Colin Jost, whom she met through Saturday Night Live, and the two married in 2020. They have a son together named Cosmo, born in 2021. By all accounts, her relationship with Jost is one of warmth, humor, and genuine partnership. She has also been involved in significant professional controversies. In 2021, she filed a lawsuit against Disney, alleging that the company had breached her contract by releasing Black Widow simultaneously on Disney Plus while it was still in theaters, which she argued significantly reduced the film's box office performance, and therefore her compensation, which was partially tied to theatrical earnings. The lawsuit settled out of court, but it sent a powerful message through the industry about the rights. Scarlett Johansson is also a singer, having released 2 albums, and she has been involved in various humanitarian and political causes throughout her career. She has spoken extensively about gender equality in Hollywood, about pay disparity, and about the treatment of women both in front of and behind the camera. She is, by any measure, one of the most accomplished, versatile, and enduring actresses of her genre. Florence Pugh. Florence Pugh was born on January 3, 1996, in Oxford, England. She grew up in a large and lively family. Her father, Clinton Pugh, runs a restaurant, and her mother, Deborah, is a dancer. She has 3 siblings, and by her own account, her childhood was warm, chaotic, creative, and full of life. The family eventually relocated to Andalusia in southern Spain for a period during her childhood, which exposed her to different cultures, languages, and ways of seeing the world from a very young age. Florence was drawn to performance almost as naturally as breathing. She was involved in school theater productions from a young age and showed an immediate gift for inhabiting characters with honesty and specificity. She was not the kind of child performer who was polished or technically precise. She was raw and instinctive, and those qualities turned out to be exactly what made her extraordinary. Her professional acting career began when she was just 17 years old. She was discovered somewhat by accident during a casting process and landed the lead role in the British independent film The Falling in 2014, directed by Carol Morley. The film is a strange and atmospheric story set in a girls' school in 1969, dealing with themes of hysteria, sexuality, and repression. Pugh's performance was immediately striking. She was 17 and playing a character of enormous internal complexity, and she managed it with a maturity and depth that seemed to come from somewhere beyond her years. The role that made the rest of the world take notice came in 2016 with Lady Macbeth, a film directed by William Oldroyd. Despite the Shakespearean title, the film is not an adaptation of Macbeth. It is set in rural Victorian England and follows a young woman trapped in a loveless and oppressive marriage who gradually reveals herself to be capable of shocking acts of violence and manipulation in pursuit of her own freedom and desire. Pugh plays the lead character Catherine with a completely magnetic and deeply unsettling combination of innocence, intelligence, and ruthlessness. The performance was universally praised. Critics could not believe what they were watching from an actress who was barely 20 years old. Lady Macbeth announced Florence Pugh as one of the most exciting and dangerous talents in British cinema, and the international industry took immediate notice. From there, her rise was rapid and extraordinary. She appeared in the Amazon series The Little Drummer Girl in 2018, a John le Carré adaptation directed by Park Chan-wook, one of South Korea's greatest filmmakers. She played a complex character caught up in international espionage and ideological conflict, and she held the screen alongside experienced veterans with complete authority. Then came Fighting with My Family in 2019, a much warmer and more comedic film in which she played real-life WWE wrestler Paige, charting her journey from a wrestling family in Norwich to the bright lights of professional American wrestling. The film required her to be physically convincing as an athlete, emotionally open as a young woman finding her identity, and funny in a very naturalistic and endearing way. She did all three things simultaneously and made it look effortless. But the role that truly detonated her career internationally came in 2019 with Midsommar, directed by Ari Aster. Midsommar is a deeply disturbing horror film set in a remote Swedish village during a midsummer festival that gradually reveals itself to be something ancient and terrifying. Pugh plays Dani, a young woman who is already dealing with a devastating personal tragedy at the beginning of the film, and who finds herself drawn deeper and deeper into something she cannot fully comprehend. The performance is extraordinary, the kind of work that requires an actor to be completely emotionally exposed and completely in control at the same time. Pugh cries in the film in a way that is almost physically uncomfortable to watch because it is so raw and so real. It is not movie crying. It is actual grief and confusion and terror. Also in 2019, she appeared in Greta Gerwig's adaptation of Little Women, playing Amy March, the youngest and often most dismissed of the March sisters. Amy is a character who has historically been played as vain and shallow, and Pugh absolutely refused to let her be either of those things. She found the intelligence, the ambition, the longing, and the genuine pain underneath Amy's surface, and in doing so she gave the character a depth and dimension that surprised everyone, including many people who thought they knew exactly what Amy March was. Many viewers and critics argued that her Amy was the most interesting and fully realized character in the film, which is saying something given the remarkable ensemble. When she was cast as Yelena Belova in Black Widow, the response from Marvel fans was immediate and enthusiastic. They recognized that Marvel had found someone genuinely exceptional, not just a competent supporting player but a performer capable of matching and challenging Scarlett Johansson herself. And that is exactly what happened. Pugh's Yelena became one of the most beloved new characters introduced in Phase 4 of the MCU, and her dynamic with Johansson was widely described as, outside of Marvel, she continued to work at the very highest level. She starred in Don't Worry Darling, directed by Olivia Wilde, alongside Harry Styles and Chris Pine. She appeared in Oppenheimer, Christopher Nolan's epic historical drama about the creation of the atomic bomb, playing Jean Tatlock opposite Cillian Murphy's J. Robert Oppenheimer. Even in a film of enormous scope and an enormous cast, she made her relatively limited screen time feel completely essential and deeply felt. In her personal life, Florence Pugh has been refreshingly outspoken and unapologetically herself. She had a high-profile relationship with director Zach Braff, which attracted some public commentary given their age difference, and she handled the noise around it with admirable directness and confidence, making clear that she did not need or want anyone else's opinion about her personal choices. She has been equally forthright about body image, about the pressures placed on women in the entertainment industry, and about the importance of protecting one's own mental health in an industry that can be Florence Pugh is, at the time of writing, still only in her late 20s, and she is already one of the most accomplished and respected actresses working anywhere in the world. The range she has demonstrated across her career is remarkable, from Victorian psychological thrillers to Swedish folk horror to Marvel blockbusters to Oscar-nominated period dramas. She brings the same quality to every single one of them, which is complete and total commitment to the truth of whoever she is playing. David Harbour. David Harbour was born on April 10, 1975, in White Plains, New York. He grew up in a middle-class household and showed an early interest in theater and performance. He attended Dartmouth College, one of the prestigious Ivy League institutions, where he studied theater and began to develop the technical foundation that would serve him throughout his career. After graduating, he moved to New York City and threw himself into the world of stage acting, which is where he spent the early and formative years of his professional life. For many years, David Harbour was exactly the kind of actor that the industry depends on but rarely celebrates publicly. He worked consistently and with great skill in supporting roles in film and television, building a reputation among directors and fellow actors as someone who was intensely committed, deeply intelligent about his craft, and capable of making any scene better simply by being in it. He appeared on Broadway multiple times, including in productions of The Rainmaker and Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, the latter being one of the most demanding plays in the American theatrical canon and one that requires performers of genuine courage and capability. He worked in television on shows including The Newsroom and Manhattan, and in films including Brokeback Mountain, Quantum of Solace, Revolutionary Road, and Suicide Squad. He was always good. That changed in 2016 with the arrival of the Netflix series Stranger Things. Harbour was cast as Jim Hopper, the police chief of the small fictional town of Hawkins, Indiana, a place where strange and terrifying things begin to happen in the summer of 1983. Hopper is introduced as a man who appears to be going through the motions of his life, numbing himself with alcohol and casual cynicism, carrying inside him a grief so enormous that it has almost swallowed him whole. As the series develops, we learn that Hopper lost a young daughter to illness years earlier, and that loss has never healed and perhaps never will. What makes Harbour's performance so remarkable is the way he layers all of that pain underneath everything the character does, even when the scene is funny or tense or action-packed. You always feel the weight of what Hopper carries, and it makes every moment of warmth or connection or courage in the character feel genuinely earned and genuinely moving. Stranger Things became one of the most watched and most talked about television series in the world, and Hopper became one of its most beloved characters. Harbour received Emmy nominations for his work on the show and won a Screen Actors Guild Award as part of the ensemble cast. Overnight, a man who had spent 20 years doing excellent and underappreciated work became one of the most recognizable faces in popular culture. The irony is that the success never seemed to surprise him or change him in any fundamental way. He had always known he was a good actor. The world had simply taken a while to catch up. His casting as Alexei Shostakov, the Red Guardian, in Black Widow was inspired and perfect. The character is essentially a comedic figure in many respects, a man whose sense of his own importance vastly exceeds the evidence, a former super soldier who has spent years in a Russian prison telling increasingly embellished stories of his past glories. But Harbour found the genuine heart and genuine sadness underneath the comedy, and the result is a character who is funny and touching in equal measure. The scenes in which Alexei tries to reconnect with Natasha and Elena and is repeatedly and firmly rebuffed are played with a vulnerability and a longing that gives the comedy an emotional weight it would not have had in lesser hands. In his personal life, David Harbour has been extraordinarily open about his struggles with mental health. He has spoken publicly and candidly about experiencing a mental health crisis in his 20s that led to a period of hospitalization. He has talked about the experience not as something shameful to be hidden, but as something that shaped him and contributed to his understanding of human complexity, which has in turn enriched his work as an actor. He has been an advocate for greater openness and honesty around mental health, particularly for men, who are often culturally discouraged from acknowledging vulnerability. He began a relationship with English singer Lily Allen in 2019, and the two married in 2020 in a ceremony in Las Vegas that became something of a cultural moment because of how joyful and unself-conscious it appeared to be. Harbour became a stepfather to Allen's two daughters from her previous marriage, and by all accounts, he has embraced that role with the same warmth and commitment he brings to everything else he does. Rachel Wise. Rachel Hannah Wise was born on March 7, 1970, in Westminster, London. Her background is one of considerable cultural and intellectual richness. Her father, George Wise, was a Hungarian-born inventor and businessman, and her mother, Edith Ruth, was a psychotherapist who was born in Vienna and came to England as a Jewish refugee fleeing Nazi persecution before the Second World War. This history of displacement, survival, and intellectual achievement runs deep in the family background and has shaped the way Wise thinks about identity, history, and the world. She grew up in North London, in the area of Hampstead, which is one of the most historically artistic and intellectually vibrant parts of the city. She attended North London Collegiate School and showed both academic excellence and a deep love of the arts from a young age. She went on to study English at Trinity Hall, Cambridge, one of the most prestigious universities in the world, and while there she became deeply involved in theatre. She co-founded a theatre company at Cambridge called the Cambridge Talking Tongues, which became one of the most celebrated student theatre groups in the country. The company was remarkable enough to be invited to perform at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe, where it won awards and attracted serious critical attention. The experience of building something creative from the ground up, of being not just a performer but an organizer and a leader, shaped the kind of artist she became. After Cambridge, she moved into professional acting in both theatre and television. Her early television work in Britain built her a reputation as a performer of intelligence and intensity. She appeared in a number of acclaimed British productions and quickly made the transition to film. Her early film work included Bernardo Bertolucci's Stealing Beauty and the thriller Chain Reaction opposite Keanu Reeves. But the role that made her a truly international star came in 1999 with The Mummy, a hugely entertaining and wildly popular adventure film in which she played Evelyn Carnahan, a spirited and bookish Egyptologist who gets caught up in a supernatural adventure. The film was enormous fun, Wise was enormously charming in it, and it launched her to a level of mainstream Hollywood success that opened doors to a much wider range of opportunities. What is most remarkable about the career that followed is the consistent quality and variety of the choices she made. She refused to simply ride the wave of commercial success and instead kept returning to challenging, substantive material. She appeared in About a Boy, Enemy at the Gates, Confidence, and then in 2005 came the role that brought her the ultimate professional recognition. She starred in Fernando Meirelles' film The Constant Gardener, based on John le Carre's novel, playing a passionate political activist whose murder in Kenya triggers a diplomatic conspiracy. The role required emotional intensity, physical commitment, and a complete embodiment of a woman driven by genuine moral conviction. She won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress for the performance, and the win was widely celebrated as both deserved and long overdue. From that point forward, she continued to work at the very highest level of the industry. She appeared in films including The Fountain, directed by Darren Aronofsky, Agora, in which she played the real-life ancient philosopher Hypatia, and The Brothers Bloom. She starred in The Deep Blue Sea, directed by Terence Davies, delivering one of the finest performances of her career as a woman consumed by destructive passion in post-war England. She appeared in The Lobster, Yorgos Lanthimos' brilliantly strange dystopian fable, and won a second Academy Award nomination for Best Actress for her role in Disobedience, in which she played an Orthodox Jewish woman returning to her London community after years of estrangement, and confronting feelings she has long suppressed. In her personal life, Rachel Weisz was with director Darren Aronofsky for several years, and they had a son together named Henry, born in 2006. The relationship eventually ended. She then began a relationship with Daniel Craig, the actor most famous for playing James Bond, and the two married in 2011 in a private ceremony that was kept so quiet that most of the world only learned about it after the fact. They have a daughter together. The image of two extraordinarily talented and accomplished people choosing to build a quiet life together away from the spectacle of Hollywood feels entirely consistent with who Rachel Weisz appears to be as a person. Her role as Melina Vostokov in Black Widow was a smaller part in terms of screen time than her usual leading work, but she brought to it exactly what the character needed, which was gravity, intelligence, and a quiet, complex pain. Melina is a woman who made terrible choices and has lived with them for a long time, and Weisz played that interiority with the kind of subtle, layered precision that only comes from decades of deep craft and genuine artistry. Ray Winstone. Ray Winstone was born on February 19, 1957, in Hackney, in the East End of London. His background is working class and deeply rooted in the culture of that part of the city, a culture that is tough, proud, loyal, and deeply community-oriented. Growing up in Hackney and later in Enfield in North London, Winstone was not initially drawn toward acting. He was a talented boxer in his youth and competed at a high level as an amateur, winning 3 London schoolboy boxing championships. The discipline, the physical courage, and the understanding of controlled aggression that he developed through boxing never left him, and they became central to the kind of actor he became. He discovered acting almost by accident, finding his way to the Corona Theatre School and discovering that he had a natural talent for performance. The acting world was not necessarily where a young man from Hackney was expected to end up, but Winstone pursued it with the same determination and grit that he brought to boxing. His early professional break came with the British television film Scum, originally made for the BBC in 1977 but banned and later released as a theatrical film in 1979. The film is set in a brutal youth detention center and deals with violence, abuse, and the dehumanizing effects of institutional power with a rawness and an unflinching directness that caused enormous controversy at the time. Winstone played the lead role with a ferocity and a physicality that immediately established him as a performer of genuine power. He was barely in his 20s and already commanding the screen with complete authority. The decades that followed saw him build one of the most distinctive and respected careers in British cinema. He worked consistently across film and television, often playing hard men and criminals but always finding the humanity underneath the toughness. His breakthrough to wider international recognition came with Gary Oldman's directorial debut Nil by Mouth in 1997, a devastating and brutally honest portrait of working-class family life in South London. Winstone played a violent and damaged man with a terrifying authenticity that left audiences shaken. The performance remains one of the finest in British cinema history. He went on to appear in films including Sexy Beast, in which he played a retired criminal trying to live a quiet life in Spain who is terrorized by the arrival of Ben Kingsley's electrifying and monstrous villain. He starred alongside Jack Nicholson in The Departed. He worked with Steven Spielberg on Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. He voiced and performed the title character in Robert Zemeckis' motion capture adaptation of Beowulf. He appeared in King Arthur, The Proposition, and Tracker. He played Henry VIII in the television series The Tudors. Throughout all of it, he brought the same quality, which is an absolute, bone-deep authenticity that makes every character feel completely real no matter how extreme or stylized the context around him might be. His role as General Dreykov in Black Widow gave him the opportunity to play a villain of considerable power and menace, a man who has built an entire empire of control and exploitation, and who feels completely untouchable within it. Winstone played Dreykov with a cold authority and a contemptuous entitlement that made him genuinely hateable, which is exactly what the role required. In his personal life, Ray Winstone has been married to Elaine McCausland since 1979, a marriage of extraordinary longevity and stability by any measure, but particularly by the standards of the entertainment industry. They have 3 daughters together, one of whom, Jamie Winstone, is herself a successful actress. He is by all accounts a devoted family man and deeply loyal to the East End culture that produced him, a man who has achieved enormous professional success without ever losing sight of where he came from. The budget of Black Widow 2021. Black Widow was not a small or modest production by any stretch of the imagination. This was a full-scale Marvel Studios blockbuster with all the financial muscle and logistical complexity that comes with being part of the most successful film franchise in cinema history. The production budget for Black Widow was officially estimated at around $200 million. That number places it comfortably among the more expensive films produced in any given year, and it reflects the enormous ambition of what Marvel and director Kate Shortland were trying to accomplish. To put that number in context, $200 million is not just a budget. It is a small economy. It is the kind of financial investment that requires an army of accountants, production managers, location scouts, legal teams, insurance brokers, and logistics coordinators just to manage the money itself, before a single frame of film is ever shot. For a production of this scale, the budget touches almost every aspect of human creative endeavor simultaneously. You have writers being paid to develop the script, concept artists being paid to visualize the world, stunt coordinators being paid to design fight sequences that will be executed safely, costume designers sourcing and constructing outfits that need to look extraordinary under multiple lighting conditions, set builders constructing entire environments from scratch, and visual effects artists creating digital worlds that will be seamlessly integrated with the live-action footage months or even years after the cameras have stopped rolling. The marketing budget for Black Widow was estimated separately, and was believed to be somewhere in the range of $100 million on top of the production budget. This is standard practice for major Hollywood releases, where the cost of telling the world that a movie exists can approach, or even match the cost of actually making it. When you add production and marketing together, you are looking at approximately $300 million total spent on bringing Black Widow into the world and into the awareness of global audiences. The film went on to gross approximately $379 million at the worldwide box office during its theatrical run, which under normal circumstances would represent a reasonable return on investment for a Marvel film. However, those were not normal circumstances, and the theatrical performance of Black Widow has to be understood in the context of the global pandemic that was still significantly affecting cinema attendance when the film was released in July 2021. Many markets around the world were still operating under various restrictions, capacity limits were in place in numerous countries, and a significant portion of the potential audience was either unable or unwilling to visit cinemas in person. Additionally, the film was simultaneously released on Disney Plus with Premier Access, meaning subscribers could pay a one-time fee of around $30 to watch the film at home on the same day it opened in theaters. This dual-release strategy, while understandable given the circumstances, directly impacted theatrical ticket sales. On Disney Plus, the film reportedly generated approximately $60 million in Premier Access purchases within its first few days of availability, which added to its overall revenue picture but also formed the basis of Scarlett Johansson's legal dispute with Disney, which centered on her claim that the simultaneous streaming release had robbed the theatrical run of a significant portion of its potential earnings and therefore reduced her compensation, which was partially tied to box office performance. The lawsuit was settled privately, with the terms undisclosed, but the episode became one of the most significant legal and business stories in the entertainment industry that year and forced studios to begin thinking much more carefully about how they structure contracts in an era where the line between theatrical and streaming release has become increasingly blurred. The money spent on Black Widow went into several distinct categories, each of which tells a story about what it actually takes to make a film of this magnitude. The cast alone represented a substantial portion of the budget. Scarlett Johansson's deal, including her base salary and any back-end participation in the film's earnings, was believed to be worth tens of millions of dollars, reflecting both her status as one of the most bankable stars in Hollywood and the decade of work she had invested in the character. The supporting cast, including Florence Pugh, David Harbour, Rachel Weisz, and Ray Winstone, collectively added millions more to the payroll, with Pugh in particular commanding a significant fee given her rapidly rising star power following her breakthrough performances in Lady Macbeth and Midsommar. The physical production itself, which took place across 5 different countries over approximately 5 months, was enormously expensive in terms of logistics alone. Filming in Norway meant dealing with remote locations, unpredictable weather, and the cost of transporting an entire film crew to one of the more expensive countries in the world. Filming in Budapest meant securing permits and managing the complexity of shooting in a major European city with its historic architecture and strict regulations around production. Morocco brought its own logistical challenges, including heat, dust, and the need to coordinate with local authorities and fixers to make the locations accessible and safe. The work done in England, spread across various studio facilities and locations, provided a more controlled environment, but still required the full apparatus of a major studio production. The stunt work on Black Widow was particularly expensive and particularly extensive. Director Kate Shortland had made clear from the very beginning that she wanted the fight sequences to feel grounded, brutal, and physically real rather than polished and superheroic in the conventional sense. She wanted the audience to feel every hit, every fall, every moment of physical consequence. Achieving that required an enormous investment in stunt choreography and stunt performance. The stunt team, led by stunt coordinator Rob Inch, spent months designing and rehearsing the fight sequences before the cameras ever started rolling. Scarlett Johansson and Florence Pugh both committed to extensive physical training and rehearsal, and they performed a significant portion of their own stunt work, particularly in the hand-to-hand combat sequences. The level of physical preparation required was extraordinary and added substantially to the pre-production budget. The visual effects on Black Widow, while perhaps less overtly spectacular than in some other MCU films, were still enormously complex and enormously expensive. The Red Room floating fortress, the aerial sequences, the destruction of the facility in the climax, the various digital environments that supported the practical locations, and the invisible wire removal and other cleanup work required a visual effects team of hundreds of artists working for well over a year. Visual effects on a film of this scale typically represent one of the largest single-line items in the entire budget, and Black Widow was no exception. The score was composed by Lorne Balfe, a Scottish composer with an extensive background in film and television music, who brought a distinctive blend of espionage thriller atmosphere and emotional warmth to the project. Hiring a composer of his caliber, recording the score with a full orchestra, and completing the complex process of music editing and sound design added further millions to the budget. The costume design, handled by Janie Temim, required the creation of hundreds of individual pieces, from the Black Widow combat suits to the elaborate Taskmaster armor to the period-accurate clothing worn in the 1995 opening sequence to the various outfits worn across multiple international locations. Every piece needed to be photographed beautifully, to survive the physical demands of action sequences, and in many cases to exist in multiple copies to allow for the inevitable damage sustained during filming. All of this, every dollar of the $200 million production budget, added up to the film that audiences finally saw when it was released on July 9, 2021. Whether one considers that money well spent depends on how one values the experience the film provides. What is undeniable is that the budget is visible on screen in every frame, from the sweeping location photography to the intricacy of the fight choreography to the emotional authenticity of the performances. The making of Black Widow. The journey from concept to completed film was long, complicated, and in many ways as interesting as the movie itself. The idea of giving Natasha Romanoff her own solo film had been discussed within Marvel for years, arguably almost from the moment Scarlett Johansson first appeared in Iron Man 2 in 2010. Fans had been asking for it almost immediately, and the question of when Marvel would finally give Black Widow her own movie became a running conversation in the fan community for the better part of a decade. The formal development process began in earnest in late 2017, when Marvel finally committed to moving forward with the standalone Black Widow film. The search for a director was extensive and thoughtful, with Marvel considering multiple candidates before settling on Kate Shortland in July 2018. Shortland was a somewhat unexpected choice by conventional Hollywood logic. She had made her name with small, intimate, character-driven Australian films, most notably Somersault and Berlin Syndrome, that were about as far from the Marvel blockbuster template as it is possible to imagine. But that unconventional background was precisely what attracted Kevin Feige and the Marvel team to her. They wanted someone who would prioritize character and emotion, who would make Natasha feel like a full human being rather than simply a superhero, and who would bring a fresh and distinctive perspective to the material. Shortland herself has described the experience of being approached for the film as completely surreal. She had not been someone who followed the MCU closely before being offered the job, and she spent time immersing herself in the existing films and in the comics and in every piece of material related to the Black Widow character before deciding that she had something genuine and personal to bring to the story. Her specific interest was in Natasha's interiority, her psychology, her history of trauma, and her complicated relationship with identity and agency. She saw the film as an opportunity to make something that was genuinely about what it means to have your choices taken from you and what it takes to reclaim them. The screenplay went through multiple writers before reaching its final form. Jack Schaefer and Ned Benson both contributed drafts before Eric Pearson, who had previous MCU experience, joined the project and ultimately received sole screenplay credit. The writing process involved extensive collaboration between Pearson, Shortland, Feige, and Johansson herself, who had clear and specific ideas about how Natasha's story should be told and was not shy about advocating for them. Johansson's involvement in the creative process went well beyond simply showing up to perform the script. She was a genuine creative partner in the development of the film, and her decade of inhabiting the character gave her insights and instincts that were invaluable to the writing process. The casting of Florence Pugh as Yelena Belova was one of the most enthusiastically received decisions of the entire production. Pugh had just completed Lady Macbeth and was on the verge of the worldwide breakthrough that Midsommar would eventually bring her, and she came to the audition process with an energy and a specificity that immediately made clear she was the only possible choice for the role. The chemistry between her and Johansson was apparent from their very first scenes together, and it deepened throughout the production into something that felt genuinely familial. The physical preparation for the film was intense for everyone involved. Johansson, who had been performing physically demanding action sequences for Marvel for a decade, approached the preparation for this film with a particular seriousness because she knew it was likely to be her final chapter with the character. She worked with trainers and stunt performers for months before filming began, focusing on the specific hand-to-hand combat style that Shortland wanted for the film, which was more grounded and brutal than what had been seen in previous MCU appearances of the character. Pugh threw herself into the physical preparation with extraordinary commitment despite having no prior background in action work, and the fight sequences she ultimately performed are a testament to the combination of her natural athleticism, her work ethic, and the skill of the stunt team around her. David Harbour's preparation for the role involved a rather different kind of physical transformation. The Red Guardian, as Harbour plays him, is not the sleek and powerful super soldier he once was. He is softer, broader, and physically diminished from his peak, though still capable of enormous feats of strength when the moment demands it. Harbour worked with the costume and prosthetics team to find the physical shape of the character, and he also did substantial research into Soviet history and culture to find the specific flavor of Russian pride and self-mythology that Alexei embodies. Filming began in May 2019 and continued through October 2019, covering locations across 5 countries. The production moved from Norway, where the spectacular and remote landscapes provided the backdrop for the film's opening aerial sequence and other exterior scenes, to England, where the bulk of the studio work was done at Pinewood Studios and other facilities, to Budapest, which played itself in the film's thrilling midsection, to Morocco, which doubled for various international locations, and finally to Macon, Georgia in the United States, where additional filming was completed. The Budapest sequences were particularly memorable to produce because they involved shooting on location in one of Europe's most beautiful and architecturally distinctive cities while also executing complex action sequences that required closing streets, coordinating with local authorities, and managing the enormous logistical challenge of a large film crew operating in a busy urban environment. The cast and crew spent weeks in Budapest, and by all accounts the experience of working and living in the city left a strong impression on everyone involved. Kate Shortland has spoken extensively about her approach to directing the film and about her relationship with Scarlett Johansson throughout the production. She has described Johansson as a deeply intelligent and deeply committed performer who challenged her at every turn, not in a difficult or obstructive way, but in the way that the very best collaborators challenge you, by always pushing for something more honest, more true, more emotionally specific than the obvious choice. Shortland has said that some of the most powerful moments in the film came from impulses and ideas that emerged organically during filming rather than from anything that was on the page, and that the trust and openness that developed between her and Johansson was what made those spontaneous discoveries possible. Funny and memorable moments on set. Now this is the part that fans always love, the behind-the-scenes stories, the unexpected moments, the laughter and the chaos that happen when you put a group of extraordinarily talented and deeply human people together on a film set for months at a time. Black Widow had plenty of all of that, and the making of documentary and various interviews given by the cast and crew over the years have revealed some genuinely wonderful stories. David Harbour became something of a legend on set for his absolute and complete commitment to being Alexei Shostakov in every possible moment. The Red Guardian suit, that magnificent and slightly too tight red costume that Alexei wears in the prison and during the escape sequence, became a source of enormous amusement on set. The suit was designed to suggest that Alexei has put on a considerable amount of weight since his glory days as a super soldier, and it was constructed to be deliberately unflattering and constricting. Harbour has described the experience of wearing it as somewhere between hilarious and genuinely difficult, because the suit limited his movement in ways that were completely intentional from a comedic standpoint, but which also meant that performing physical action sequences while wearing it required improvisation and creativity that nobody had quite anticipated. He reportedly spent a significant amount of time between takes simply waddling around the set in the suit, completely in character, making the crew laugh while also somehow maintaining the dignity of a man who considers himself the greatest super soldier who ever lived. Harbour has also spoken about the experience of working with Scarlett Johansson and Florence Pugh and the specific dynamic that developed between the three of them as a surrogate family unit. He described Johansson as someone with an extraordinarily dry and quick wit who would deliver devastating one-liners between takes without any warning and then immediately return to complete seriousness when the camera was rolling. He and Johansson developed an easy, warm rapport that translated directly into the screen chemistry between Natasha and Alexei, and he has credited the natural quality of their interactions off-camera as the foundation of everything that works in their scenes together. Florence Pugh was by all accounts an absolute force of nature on set, in the very best possible way. Multiple members of the cast and crew have described her as someone who brought an infectious energy and a complete lack of pretension to every single day of filming. She was apparently just as funny and unpredictable off-camera as she was on it, and her relationship with Johansson quickly developed into something that genuinely resembled the sisterly dynamic they were performing in the film. The two of them have spoken about playing games on set between takes, teasing each other mercilessly, and finding ways to make each other laugh at the most inopportune moments. One of the most widely discussed behind-the-scenes stories from the production involves the scene in which Yelena and Natasha are sitting at a table together and having a deeply personal conversation, and Pugh suddenly, completely out of nowhere, began doing a very committed physical bit about something that had nothing to do with the scene, causing Johansson to completely lose her composure and dissolve into laughter that she was unable to contain for several minutes. The exact specifics of what Pugh did vary slightly depending on who is telling the story, but the consistent detail is that Johansson, who is by reputation a very controlled and professional performer on set, was completely unable to keep it together, and that the moment of genuine, uncontrollable laughter between the two of them was one of the things that cemented their real friendship during the production. Kate Shortland has talked about the challenge and the joy of directing an action sequence involving both Johansson and Pugh in which the two of them were supposed to be fighting each other in a confined space. The sequence required extensive choreography and was physically demanding for both performers. But what kept happening, apparently, was that in the moments between takes, Johansson and Pugh would immediately drop the adversarial dynamic of the scene and revert to their actual relationship, which was warm and conspiratorial and full of private jokes, meaning that Shortland frequently had to wait several minutes for both of them to stop laughing before she could call action again. She has described this as both charming and mildly exasperating in equal measure, and has said that the warmth between the two actresses made the emotional core of the film possible, but also made the process of shooting the more combative scenes between them considerably more time-consuming than the schedule anticipated. Rachel Weisz brought her characteristic elegance and intelligence to the set, but apparently also a very well-developed sense of humor that surprised some people who expected her to be more reserved. Cast members have described her as someone who was quietly and devastatingly funny in a very understated way, delivering observations and comments that would land with a slight delay because you needed a moment to fully process what she had just said. Her friendship with Johansson on set was warm and easy, and the two of them apparently spent a significant amount of their downtime between scenes talking about film, about their careers, and about the experience of being women who had navigated the Hollywood system across multiple decades. Ray Winstone, bringing his unmistakable East London energy to the set of a Marvel blockbuster, was apparently a constant source of entertainment for the entire crew. Winstone is known throughout the British film industry as someone who is completely genuine and completely unpretentious, who treats everyone from the director to the most junior crew member with the same directness and warmth. He apparently had a wonderful time playing a villain of global menace while simultaneously being one of the most approachable and down-to-earth people on the entire production. The contrast between the cold, calculating General Dreykov on screen and the warm, gregarious Ray Winstone on set became something of a running joke among the crew. The stunt team, led by coordinator Rob Inch, also contributed significantly to the lighter moments of the production. The process of designing and rehearsing the fight sequences, which was both rigorous and creative, apparently involved a great deal of improvisation and experimentation that occasionally veered into the genuinely absurd. Various techniques and approaches would be tried during rehearsal that looked spectacular in theory but fell apart completely in execution, and the cast and stunt performers would frequently end up on the floor laughing at the chaos before resetting and trying again. The stunt rehearsal process, which is usually presented as something serious and methodical, apparently had a quality of collaborative playfulness on Black Widow that everyone who participated in it looks back on with great affection. The filming of the prison break sequence, in which Natasha and Yelena arrive to free Alexei from his Russian prison, reportedly involved a number of unexpected and genuinely hilarious complications related to David Harbour's Red Guardian suit. The sequence required Harbour to perform various physical feats in the suit, and the combination of the suit's restrictions and Harbour's enormous physical commitment to the role produced several takes that went in completely unexpected directions, and that sent the crew into fits of laughter, while also somehow working better than anything that had been planned. Harbour himself has described the filming of that sequence as one of the most enjoyable experiences of his professional career, precisely because of the creative chaos that surrounded it. Kate Shortland has also spoken about a particularly memorable day of filming in Budapest when the weather turned dramatically and unexpectedly against the production, transforming what was supposed to be a controlled exterior sequence into something considerably more chaotic and improvised. Rather than shutting down and waiting for conditions to improve, the cast and crew made the collective decision to push through, and the energy and urgency that the weather forced into the performances ended up being exactly what the scene needed. Shortland has described it as one of those genuinely magical filmmaking moments when the universe intervenes in your production in a way that is disruptive and stressful in the moment, but which produces something on screen that you could never have planned or manufactured. The making of documentary The Making of Black Widow, released on Disney Plus as part of the Marvel Studios Assembled series, captured many of these behind-the-scenes moments and provided fans with an extraordinary window into the production. The documentary shows the cast in rehearsal, in costume tests, between takes, and in the kind of unguarded moments that reveal who people actually are when the cameras are not officially rolling. What comes through most powerfully in the documentary is the genuine affection and respect that existed between everyone involved in the production, from the director to the stars to the crew members who never appear on screen. It was a production driven by shared love for the character, shared commitment to doing justice to her story, and a warmth between human beings that made the difficult and exhausting process of making a $200 million film feel, at least some of the time, like something genuinely joyful. The Cold War legacy and its shadow over the film. To truly understand Black Widow as a film, you have to go back much further than 2021. You have to go back to one of the most defining and consequential periods in modern human history, the Cold War, because the entire world of Black Widow, its ideology, its institutions, its characters, and its central conflict, is rooted in that era in ways that are both explicit and deeply embedded in the cultural DNA of the story. The Cold War was not a conventional war in the traditional military sense. There were no great set-piece battles between opposing armies on open fields. Instead, it was a decades-long ideological, political, technological, and psychological struggle between two superpowers, the United States of America and the Soviet Union, each of which represented a fundamentally different vision of how human society should be organized. The United States championed capitalism, liberal democracy, and individual freedom. The Soviet Union championed communism, collective ownership, and the subordination of individual desire to the needs of the state. These two visions were not merely different political philosophies. They were competing religions, each with its own mythology, its own martyrs, its own vision of the good society, and its own profound certainty that it represented the future of humanity. The conflict between these two systems played out across every domain of human activity, from the space race to the arms race to the proxy wars fought in Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, and dozens of other countries across the globe. But one of its most distinctive and historically significant expressions was in the world of intelligence and espionage. Both superpowers invested enormous resources in building intelligence agencies of extraordinary sophistication and reach. The Americans had the CIA. The Soviets had the KGB. And both of them recruited, trained, and deployed human agents in operations that ranged from the mundane collection of information to the dramatic and morally complex world of deep cover operations, where agents would spend years or even decades living entirely false lives in enemy territory. Black Widow draws directly and deliberately from this historical reality. The Red Room program, the brutal Soviet institution that took young girls and turned them into assassins, is not a purely fantastical invention. It is rooted in documented historical practices and in the documented reality of how the Soviet intelligence apparatus treated human beings as instruments of state power rather than as individuals with inherent worth and dignity. The idea that the Soviet system would create a program specifically designed to weaponize women, to use their perceived social invisibility, and their ability to exploit gendered expectations of trust and vulnerability as tools of intelligence gathering and assassination, is historically grounded in ways that make the fictional Red Room feel less like fantasy and more like a slightly heightened version of things that actually happened. The KGB's use of what were known as honey traps, operations in which attractive agents would seduce foreign targets to extract information or to compromise them for future blackmail, is extremely well documented. The organization also maintained training schools for intelligence operatives that subjected their recruits to conditions of extraordinary rigor and psychological pressure. The idea of young people being taken and systematically reshaped into instruments of the state, stripped of their individual identity and reconstructed as operatives loyal to an ideology rather than to themselves, is a recurring theme in the actual history of Soviet intelligence. And it is this history that gives the fictional Red Room its cultural weight and its emotional resonance. The specific historical context of 1995. The film's opening sequence is set specifically in 1995, and that specific date is historically meaningful in ways that enrich the film considerably for viewers who understand the context. By 1995, the Soviet Union had already collapsed. The formal dissolution of the USSR had occurred in December 1991, just a few years before the film's opening scene. What this means is that Alexei, Melina, Natasha, and Yelena are not operating as agents of a functioning superpower. They are operating as agents of a ghost, a system whose official state apparatus has already crumbled but whose institutional structures, its intelligence networks, its training programs, its ideological loyalists, continue to function in the shadows. This historical detail gives the characters a particular kind of tragedy. They are fighting for and serving a system that has already, in the most fundamental political sense, lost. The Soviet dream of a communist world order has been abandoned by history. And yet the Red Room continues. General Dreykov continues. The girls continue to be taken and trained and deployed, not because the great geopolitical struggle they were originally part of still exists in the same form, but because the institutions and the power structures and the individual human beings who built those institutions have an existence and a momentum that outlasts the ideological framework that justified them in the first place. This is, in fact, one of the most historically accurate and culturally insightful elements of the entire film. The collapse of the Soviet Union did not instantly dissolve all of the networks, the loyalties, the training programs, and the operational structures that the KGB and related agencies had built over decades. Many of those structures continued to function in various forms. Many of the people who had been trained within them continued to operate, serving new masters or serving only themselves. The post-Soviet landscape of the mid-1990s was a genuinely dangerous and chaotic environment in which the remnants of the old system coexisted uneasily with the emergence of new power structures, new criminal organizations, and new forms of state and non-state violence. Black Widow situates itself precisely in this historical moment, and draws from it a cultural authenticity that strengthens the entire narrative. The Red Room as a historical and cultural symbol. The Red Room is the central institution of Black Widow's story, and it functions on multiple levels simultaneously. On the surface, it is a plot device, the villainous organization that Natasha and her allies must destroy. But at a deeper level, it is a cultural symbol of enormous power and historical resonance. The practice of state-sponsored programs designed to train young people as operatives, beginning their conditioning at a very young age and systematically dismantling their individual identity in the process, has historical precedents that extend well beyond the Soviet Union. Many authoritarian states across history have operated institutions designed to take children and reshape them into instruments of state power, stripping them of family, of community, of language, of culture, and of individual will, and replacing all of those things with loyalty to the ideology and to the institution. The boarding schools that various colonial powers used to assimilate indigenous children, the youth programs of various fascist and communist states, the child soldier programs that have existed in various conflict zones around the world, all of these share a fundamental structural similarity with the Red Room. They all operate on the premise that a human being, taken young enough and subjected to sufficient pressure and conditioning, can be remade into whatever the institution requires. What makes the Red Room specifically interesting as a cultural symbol is the way it intersects with gender. The Black Widows are all women. They have been taken and trained and controlled specifically because of their gender, because the system recognized that women could be weaponized in particular ways and deployed in particular contexts that male operatives could not access as effectively. But the system also controls them through means that are specifically gendered in their horror. The forced sterilization that is mentioned in the films and other MCU content, the chemical mind control that removes their ability to make their own choices, the way they are owned and deployed like property rather than treated as people. All of these elements of the Red Room speak directly to the specific forms of violence and control that have historically been visited upon women by patriarchal institutions and systems of power. The film is therefore engaging, whether consciously or not, with a very long and very dark history of the systematic violation of women's bodily autonomy and psychological freedom by institutions that view women as means rather than ends, as tools rather than people. This gives the Red Room a cultural weight that extends well beyond the boundaries of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and connects the film to debates and histories that are deeply relevant to the contemporary moment in which it was made and released. The spy thriller genre and its cultural history. Black Widow is not just a superhero film. It is also, explicitly and deliberately, a spy thriller, and understanding its place within the history and culture of that genre is essential to understanding what the film is doing and why it does it the way it does. The spy thriller as a genre has a history that is intimately connected to the Cold War. The genre essentially came of age in the 1950s and 1960s, as the reality of superpower espionage captured the imagination of writers, filmmakers, and audiences around the world. Ian Fleming's James Bond novels, the first of which was published in 1953, established many of the conventions that would define the genre for decades. The lone operative, working in the shadows, deploying extraordinary skills in the service of their nation against an enemy of global ambition, became one of the defining archetypes of 20th century popular culture. But the Bond template was also, from the very beginning, a deeply gendered one. Bond is male. His adversaries are male. The women in the Bond universe are, with very few exceptions, either objects of desire, victims to be rescued, or villains to be defeated. They exist in relation to the male protagonist rather than as protagonists in their own right. The entire architecture of the classic spy thriller was built around male agency and male perspective, with women occupying supporting or decorative roles in a world defined and controlled by men. Black Widow is, among other things, a direct and conscious response to this tradition. It takes the conventions of the spy thriller, the globe-trotting adventure, the shadowy organizations, the action sequences, the moral ambiguity, the world of secrets and betrayals, and it places a woman at the absolute center of that world. Not as a love interest. Not as a supporting player. Not as a villain defined by her relationship to a male hero. But as the protagonist, the agent, the person whose perspective and whose choices and whose history drive every single element of the narrative. This is a more radical gesture than it might initially appear, because the spy thriller genre is not just an entertainment category. It is a cultural form that has shaped the way multiple generations of people think about courage, competence, national loyalty, and the relationship between the individual and the state. By claiming that genre for a female protagonist and by using it to tell a story specifically about the ways women have been exploited, controlled, and denied agency by powerful institutions, Black Widow is engaging in a form of cultural reclamation that has meaning beyond the boundaries of any individual film. The film also draws on a more recent tradition of female-centered spy thrillers that emerged in the years immediately before its production. Films like Atomic Blonde and Red Sparrow, both released in the period between 2017 and 2018, helped establish that there was both a cultural appetite and a commercial market for spy thrillers centered on female operatives. Black Widow builds on that tradition while also benefiting from the enormously larger platform provided by the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which gave the film an audience that neither Atomic Blonde nor Red Sparrow could have approached. The cultural politics of female autonomy and bodily control. One of the most culturally significant and historically resonant aspects of Black Widow is its engagement with questions of female bodily autonomy and the political dimensions of control over women's bodies and reproductive choices. These are not abstract or academic concerns. They are among the most contested and culturally charged questions in contemporary democratic societies, and Black Widow engages with them with a directness and a seriousness that is quite unusual for a film of its scale and commercial profile. The Black Widows in the film have been subjected to forced sterilization as part of their conditioning in the Red Room. This is referenced in the film in a way that is matter-of-fact rather than sensationalized, which in many ways makes it more powerful than if it had been presented dramatically. The casual, institutional nature of the violation reflects the reality that these kinds of atrocities are most often not committed by individuals acting out of personal malice but by institutions operating according to their own logic, in which individual human beings are simply variables to be managed rather than people to be respected. Forced sterilization has a real and deeply troubling history that extends across multiple cultures, multiple political systems, and multiple historical periods. It has been practiced by fascist regimes, by communist regimes, by colonial powers, and by democratic governments that convinced themselves it was a legitimate tool of social policy. In the 20th century, it was practiced against people who were considered genetically undesirable, against people with disabilities, against colonized peoples, against ethnic minorities, and against women who were deemed socially deviant in various ways. The history of forced sterilization is a history of the state claiming absolute authority over the most intimate and personal dimensions of human life, and it is a history that continues to be relevant in the contemporary world. By incorporating this element into the Red Room's practices, Black Widow situates itself within this history and uses it to make a point about power, about the relationship between institutions and the individuals they claim to serve or control, and about the specific vulnerability of women within systems that treat them as instruments rather than as full human beings. The chemical mind control used to keep the Black Widows compliant and obedient is another element that functions as a cultural and historical symbol as well as a narrative device. The idea of a substance that removes a person's ability to exercise their own will, that makes them compliant and obedient against their own desires and instincts, is a metaphor for the various chemical, psychological, social, and institutional mechanisms that have historically been used to control women and to enforce their compliance with systems and expectations that serve the interests of others rather than their own. The antidote that frees Yelena and eventually the other widows is therefore not just a plot device. It is a symbol of liberation, of the recovery of agency, of the possibility of reclaiming oneself after having been defined and controlled by an external power. The cultural significance of family and identity. At its core, Black Widow is a film about family and identity, and these themes have deep cultural and historical dimensions that give the film much of its emotional power. The fake family at the center of the film, Alexei and Melina posing as parents to Natasha and Yelena, is a construct built on deception and instrumentality. They are a family created by an intelligence program to serve a mission, and every element of their domestic life is manufactured rather than genuine. And yet the film insists, quietly but persistently, that the feelings that developed within this artificial structure were real. Natasha grieved the loss of that family. Yelena was shaped by it in ways she cannot fully account for. Even Alexei and Melina, who knew the truth from the beginning, formed genuine attachments that continued to matter to them decades later. This is a culturally and philosophically interesting proposition. It suggests that family is not simply a biological or legal category. It is an emotional reality that can exist even within relationships that were not formed through conventional means. It suggests that the feelings of love and belonging that develop between people who share a life together have a reality and a validity that are not negated by the circumstances of how those people came to be together in the first place. This idea resonates across a wide range of contemporary cultural conversations about what constitutes a family, about the various forms that family can take, and about the question of whether family is defined by biology or by choice and shared experience. Black Widow takes a clear position on this question. It argues for the reality and the value of chosen family, of the connections that form between people who did not choose each other in the conventional sense but who nevertheless became genuinely important to one another. The question of identity that runs through the film is equally culturally rich. Natasha Romanoff has spent her entire life not knowing who she truly is. She was taken as an infant, given a false identity, subjected to conditioning designed to reshape her personality and her loyalties, and trained to be someone whose purpose was defined entirely by the needs of others. Her journey through the film is a journey toward the recovery of an authentic self, toward the understanding that who she is not determined by what was done to her or by the role she was assigned by a system that viewed her as a tool. This theme resonates deeply with contemporary cultural conversations about identity, authenticity, and the right of individuals to define themselves rather than being defined by external categories, institutions, or expectations. The film uses the extreme and fantastical context of the Red Room to explore questions about identity formation and self-determination that are relevant to a very wide range of human experiences. From the experiences of people who have been subjected to various forms of institutional control or cultural erasure to the more everyday experiences of anyone who has ever struggled to understand who they are beneath the layers of expectation and conditioning that society places on every individual. From the moment of birth. The historical reality of women in intelligence. The cultural history of women in intelligence work is long, fascinating, and largely underappreciated, and Black Widow implicitly engages with this history by centering its story on female operatives in a world that has historically been dominated by male narratives. Women have played significant roles in intelligence and espionage throughout history, often in ways that were more effective precisely because the prevailing cultural assumptions of the time made women seem like unlikely or improbable agents. During the Second World War, women served as resistance fighters, code breakers, radio operators, and couriers in virtually every country involved in the conflict. The British Special Operations Executive, which sent agents behind enemy lines in occupied Europe, recruited and deployed a significant number of female agents, several of whom were captured and executed by the Nazi regime. These women operated under conditions of extreme danger and demonstrated a courage and a capability that challenged the cultural assumptions of their time about what women were capable of. During the Cold War, women served in intelligence roles on both sides of the conflict, though the nature and extent of their roles were often classified and have only gradually come to light through declassified documents and historical research. The KGB did recruit and train female operatives, and there are documented cases of women being used in exactly the kinds of deep cover and honey trap operations that the Red Room represents in fictionalized form in the film. By placing women at the center of the espionage world and by treating their skills, their courage, and their professional capability as entirely natural and unremarkable, Black Widow participates in a broader cultural project of recovering and celebrating the history of women in fields that have historically been dominated by male narratives. It says, without making a speech about it, that women have always been capable of extraordinary things, that they have always been present in the most consequential and dangerous arenas of human activity, and that the story of the world is incomplete and inaccurate when it is told only through the experiences and perspectives of men. The cultural moment of the film's release. Black Widow was released in July 2021, and the cultural moment of its release matters to understanding how the film was received and what it meant to the audiences who saw it. The film arrived in the middle of a period of intense and global conversation about gender, power, and institutional accountability. The Me Too movement, which had erupted in 2017, had fundamentally changed the cultural conversation about the ways powerful institutions protect powerful individuals at the expense of the women they harm. The revelations that came out of that movement, about the systematic ways in which industries and institutions had enabled and concealed the abuse of women by powerful men for decades, created a cultural context in which a film about women who had been systematically exploited and controlled by a powerful man and his institution carried an obvious and immediate relevance. The character of General Dreykov, a man who takes young girls, breaks them down, removes their ability to refuse or resist, and deploys them as instruments of his own power and ambition, resonated in the cultural moment of 2021 in ways that would not have been quite as sharp or as immediate at an earlier point in time. The film gave audiences a villain whose monstrousness was not rooted in supernatural evil or alien ideology but in a recognizable pattern of gendered exploitation and institutional protection. He is a man who has convinced himself that what he does is justified by a larger purpose, who has surrounded himself with systems and structures that protect him from accountability, and who responds to the possibility of being held responsible for his actions with contempt and disbelief. He is, in other words, a type that 2021 audiences recognize from the real world. The film's exploration of these themes, within the framework of a Marvel blockbuster with its enormous global audience, meant that ideas and conversations that might otherwise have remained confined to more specialized cultural contexts were brought to an audience of tens of millions of people around the world. Whatever its limitations as a piece of cinema, Black Widow succeeded in placing genuine and serious cultural questions about power, gender, autonomy, and institutional accountability at the center of one of the most commercially dominant entertainment franchises in the history of the medium. That is not a small achievement, and it is part of what makes the film historically and culturally significant beyond its entertainment value. The legacy of Black Widow in cultural history. When historians of popular culture look back at the Marvel Cinematic Universe and its place in the cultural history of the early 21st century, Black Widow will be remembered as a transitional and significant film for several reasons. It represented the formal acknowledgement by the most commercially successful franchise in cinema history that female-centered superhero stories had been undervalued and underproduced, and that rectifying that imbalance was both culturally important and commercially viable. It introduced characters, particularly Yelena Belova, who extended and enriched the cultural conversation about female agency and identity that the film had begun. And it engaged, seriously and thoughtfully, with historical and cultural material about the Cold War, about institutional exploitation of women, and about the long shadow of Soviet history in a way that gave a genre film genuine intellectual and emotional substance. The film also contributed to a broader cultural shift in how the superhero genre was being understood and developed. The superhero film had for most of its history been primarily concerned with external conflict, with the defeat of powerful villains and the protection of the innocent, and had treated its characters' inner lives as largely secondary to the spectacle of their powers and their battles. Black Widow insisted that the inner life was the real subject, that the most interesting and important questions were not about who would win the final battle but about who these people were beneath their abilities and their costumes and their missions. That insistence, and the degree to which it succeeded in the film, helped push the entire genre in a direction that has continued to bear fruit in subsequent Marvel productions.